Breaking news coming out of the NBA. The Denver Nuggets have fired their head coach Michael Malone as well as their GM Calvin Booth. This news comes just 2 years after the Nuggets have won the 2023 NBA championship, and with the Memphis Grizzlies firing their head coach Taylor Jenkins just about 10 days ago. This comes at a strange juncture because the NBA playoffs are right around the corner. The Nuggets are in the thick of it in a heated Western Conference playoff race where they could be as high as the 3 seed or fall to win the playoff tournament and drop to the 8 seed. Just a simple slide could mean that they could end up being a team that hosts a first round playoff series to being going through the play-in tournament and also ending up playing on the road for the entirety of the postseason. With Malone's firing, he joins a strange list developing the last few years of recent head coaches who have won NBA championships only to be fired shortly after. We saw that with Nick Nurse and the Toronto Raptors. We saw this with Frank Vogel and the LA Lakers, and even recently with Coach Budenholzer being fired from the Milwaukee Bucks after winning the title in 2022. To me, this move feels like Mike Malone has lost the locker room. Just a month ago, after the Trailblazers beat the Denver Nuggets, Mike Malone didn't mince words for his teams. He said they lacked effort, they didn't seem to be prepared as they didn't pay attention to the film, and they don't seem to be watching film on a consistent basis. This isn't abnormal for Mike Malone. I mean, I think even just a couple years ago when they won the title, he's been very harsh, especially when they don't get back on defense or they don't play hard. That message or that type of coaching has worked for the Denver Nuggets in the past. However, within the last couple of years, they've shed a lot of the veterans off their roster for newer, younger players, and it's a different tune and a different message that maybe perceived or received to these different type of players. And for whatever reason, the Nuggets never seem to get on track this year. They're currently in the midst of a 4-game slide as they one time had an opportunity to get the 2 seed, but seems like they might be struggling just to even host a first round playoff series like I said before. Another piece of evidence to say that Mike Malone maybe has lost their locker room, well, stars like Jamal Murray, who is arguably their second best player, he seemed to not really appreciate Mike Malone's harsh words after a loss against the New York Knicks, where the Knicks blew out the Denver Nuggets by more than 30 points, almost 40 at home. This came after a road trip where the Lakers hosted the Denver Nuggets, and it seemed that Jamal Murray hinted that quite a few Nuggets players stayed back in LA to hang out, maybe go out and whatnot after the game was over. And obviously the regular season's a grind. We've talked about how players seem to lack focus, and this seems to be a message where Mike Malone and his shooting guard weren't on the same page after that kind of hinting in that press conference. Now, while it definitely seems that the Nuggets haven't been the greatest team in the last couple of years, they were just 1 game away from the Western Conference Finals last year, and I do think that roster construction plays a big factor into it. And we can talk about how the recent CBA and the second apron cost the Nuggets players like Bruce Brown and KCP, but remember, the GM, Calvin Booth, definitely had his role as well, as he was also let go on Tuesday. In that news, Calvin Booth had a lot of weight and a lot of issues with building the roster, where he tried to prioritize building a younger core and letting veterans walk. And I understand the perspective. Get cheaper with younger players that you can simply start and insert into your roster, but it doesn't really work like that. Younger players these days in the NBA take quite a bit of time to develop, and when you're in the midst of trying to win titles, it makes sense to bring back some veterans. And I understand with the luxury tax and roster construction, it's difficult, especially with this modern CBA. But KCP and Bruce Brown were arguably some of the biggest depth pieces enrolled in that 2023 title run to the finals, where they won it all. And KCP is such a vital wing defender that was sorely missed this season, and that kind of changed the whole roster in its entirety. I mean, what that had to do is you bring in Christian Brown off the bench as a starter to replace those KCP minutes, and has that been a perfect fit? Not quite, but it's a different role provided by a different player. Next, you bring in Russell Westbrook, who has been up and down, and we'll talk about him a little bit later in this podcast, but for this season with the Nuggets, he's been solid. But this is at the cost of their depth. I mean, they have no bench. They might have a pretty good starting five, but remember, in the playoffs, you need bench to get you through to the NBA Finals, because the deeper the roster, that means you have opportunities to not overwork your starters to the point where they are going to be out of gas after a 2-month run to the NBA Finals. We've seen this with the New York Knicks. Last year it seemed evident with the Denver Nuggets as Nikola Jokic continues to take on a larger and larger role as his surrounding cast continues to fail him. And let's also talk about this surrounding cast, particularly Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, and Jamal Murray. Now, Michael Porter Jr., he got a bag just after they won it all in 2023, and has he been living up to that type of money? Not quite. I mean, it's been solid numbers. He's averaging about 19 points a game on a very efficient shooting stats, but I really expected him after the title that they won that he was going to elevate his play. He was going to be the second best player for the Denver Nuggets as Jamal Murray continues to get up there in age, where his body seems to be breaking down every year to the point where he's going to be missing 20 odd games per season. I mean, just last year he played 61 or 62 games. The year before he played 59 games as they won the title. This is all coming off the heels when he tore his ACL in the 2021 season and he missed the entirety of the 2022 season. So definitely a lot of inconsistencies with the play. Jamal Murray is obviously another integral piece, but outside of the 2023 postseason, he hasn't been totally available or totally healthy going into those postseason runs, but yet he also got the bag, and the production hasn't really reflected that type of pay. Now, I wouldn't be too harsh on Aaron Gordon's role. I think Aaron Gordon has been the most consistent role player for the Nuggets. He does what he's asked to do, and then the nights that he does have a very efficient night or goes above his averages, especially scoring-wise, is always a wanted bonus, and I always see him giving out very good effort. He's always there to defend guys on the block when Nikola is bothered or dealing with guarding the paint. Aaron will do the dirty work. I've seen that consistently, so I don't think his presence is really a negative, but I think I'm more disappointed with the aforementioned Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray. With these two contract extensions, those seem to be a couple of missteps that Calvin Booth made in constructing the roster from the year that they won the title a couple years ago. If he were able to reallocate those funds that he used to bring back and extend Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray, he could have maybe brought back KCP or Bruce Brown, but unfortunately those seem to be issues and missteps that cost the franchise, because we've seen Nikola Jokic pour it on. In the last couple of years he's been great. He won MVP last year, should have won MVP in 2023, and should win 2025's MVP as well. But regardless, it seems to be a continuous dysfunction with the Denver Nuggets, who lucked into getting Nikola Jokic just a decade ago. And it seems like only a couple years ago when the window was wide open for the Denver Nuggets, and now it seems to be slammed totally shut, with a lot of questions looming over their heads heading into this offseason. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Who's to blame for the Nuggets' recent dysfunction?